Ladies and gentlemen, I am high. Okay, I'll say it again. I am freaking high. And it's not just because the edibles just kicked in. It's partially because the edibles are real. No, I'm jazzed because I just had an incredible conversation with the one and only, the unbelievably talented, the man of the moment, Austin Peterson of the Wake Up America show. You know who he is. Come on, if you don't, shame on you. It'd be it'd be a sad state of affairs if you know who I am and you don't know who he is. A big name. I had just landed a big name. And there's a reason most of the time people develop big followings. It's because they got a lot of talent and they work really hard. And that is exactly how I would describe Austin Peterson. A real privilege, a real honor to connect with him and for him to give me as much time as he did. We talked about all the hot button issues. And although we spoke for an hour and covered a lot of ground, in one sense, we barely scratched the surface. So I hope to have him back, and I think I established a good rapport with him. But it was just fantastic. I'm really jazzed by it, as you can tell. This is what I wanted to do, man. I don't want to be overly enamored with the fact that I just spoke to someone with a big following, but you know, it's a cool little milestone for me. It was a really instructive conversation. Really helped me. So what I wanted out of a guest, he delivered, but also he offers um, a vision, a guide for me, someone who I can mimic, copy. You know what mimic means? In case you don't, it means copy. Because, he's only a couple years older than me and I can model after what he's doing, even if I don't end up agreeing with his politics, which, by the way, after talking to him, gun to my head, I agree with him totally. So that's my issue, right? Every time I talk to somebody who's halfway intelligent, gun to my head, they're right. I agree. So this is what I'm doing. I'm searching for political identity, but again, this was a good notch in the bedpost, so to speak. So, Austin Peterson, thank you so much. And audience, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and I'll see you next time. Austin, welcome on. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Brian. I'm looking forward to this conversation. We've been trying to get this done for weeks.
I know. I promise I didn't total my car on purpose because I wasn't ready. That was a pure chance. So, Austin, you have a background in musical theater. Is that right?
Yes, but I'm not gay.
Okay. Yeah, sure you aren't. No, you've got a beautiful wife, very public on X, and she is pregnant. So congratulations, by the way, on that. That's very exciting.
Thanks very much.
If you're not gay, you're definitely committed.
I am definitely the father. Yeah, no, great. Life's been good to me. I mean, there's been a lot of ups and downs to get where I'm at, but I was good at producing and writing and directing, and there aren't a lot of degrees out here in the Midwest for people who want to go to a state school that can kind of, if you can do it all, you basically can only really major in like a few different arts. But I wrote plays in college. I won some awards for playwriting, and I majored in musical theater because I wanted to learn how to dance and sing and do things that I wasn't necessarily all that great at the time and improve my skills. And moved to New York City after college and did a lot of bits and bobs in show business here and there, some behind the scenes stuff, and did some soap operas and some modeling and whatever jobs you could get, because whenever you're trying to make it in the business, you're always you're like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that job or what have you. And then I kind of got the politics bug back around 2008 for Ron Paul's presidential campaign. And I sort of combined my loves because I love working with cameras, and I love working with people, and I love the creative arts, but I'm also really passionate about philosophy and ideas. So I kind of merged my passions with history and philosophy and with activism and for the ideas of liberty, which I'm very much inspired by. Merge those with my creative pursuits. And so that's, I've worked in television, I've worked in film, I've worked in radio, and now I own my own media company and I produce podcasts. So it's been a very exciting career. And I even ran for president at one point, which was really fun too. I'm sure we'll talk about that.
So much going on in your life, and you seem to be on fire right now, and this seems to be your moment. Correct me if I'm wrong. And obviously, behind every moment there's the rise that we don't see, as you mentioned. So nothing comes easy. But are you in the pocket right now? Would you say that you're kind of full bore?
Wow. Well, I guess it's hard to qualify something like that because I've always wanted to have my own media company and to be able to make a living from it. So I guess, yeah, you can because it's funny. Somebody was ripping on me yesterday saying that whoever I was criticizing, he makes more money than you. And I'm like, maybe he does in terms of just like dollars to donuts. But at the end of the day, I'm probably more wealthy than he is because wealth is definitely something that requires a much broader perspective than just money. Like, yeah, I make good money with my show and my business and my merchandise and all of that, but like I have a really good high quality of life. Like I own my time. I go where I want. I do what I want when I want to do what I want. I mean, if you're a libertarian, I mean, I basically have about as much liberty as you could want. I got 5.5 acres I live on here. We've got a beautiful creek in the backyard. I've got a child on the way, smoking hot, redheaded libertarian Jewish wife. What more can a guy ask for? So I basically have pretty much everything that like a man like myself could want. So, I mean, yeah, but I see a future for even more. I've got, more ambitions and dreams and plans of what I want to do to grow out this business and this network on a 5 to 10 to 15-year timeline. So, I mean, I'm always the type that wants more. So, like, I'd be happy if I was where I'm at right now for the rest of my life. But I think, you always want to look down the line because if you're standing still, you're really falling behind. You know what I mean?
You're a force, man. I mean, really, do you think one of the problems in society today is that not enough people are dreaming as big and as hard as you are? I think it seems that way.
Well, I've always kind of felt like it was a necessity thing, right? Like it's a back to the walls because let's be honest, Brian, for guys like us, like we don't get anything handed to us in this life. Nobody's going to give, and especially now, the way the job market is, like I hear about people who are searching for jobs right now, and I listen to podcasts of people who are like trying to go and work for somebody else, and people they can't get jobs. All these jobs are listed, but these people can't get jobs and I'm hearing about how terrible the job market is and how your bosses. I mean, I've worked at corporations. I know what it's like to be treated like crap. I think that the problem we have right now is that some people in society are still kind of locked into the old way of doing things where it's like, especially the boomer mindset. No offense, I love my boomers in my life, but they still sort of think that you're going to go work for a company for like 20, 40 years. And they don't understand that like that's not how the economy works anymore. But as we're sort of transitioning into a more kind of gig economy, solopreneur economy, individuals working for themselves, working from home, as we're kind of transitioning to this new economy, people are having a hard time kind of figuring out, well, what does that mean for my life long term? If I'm not going to have that kind of stability that my parents or my grandparents are going to have, what is it that I need to do in order to survive, to make a living, to have health insurance? Whereas, like for me, I've always been the type of person that knew that because nothing was going to be handed to me, I have to work 10 times harder than everybody else. Because I'll be honest, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm not a genius, right? I don't have 180 IQ. I'm not a Jordan Peterson or I'm not one of these guys. I've always been the type of person that I knew that if I wanted to be successful, it was the tortoise and the hare, and I'm the tortoise. I'm going to have to work 10 times harder than everybody else. So the funny thing is that talent can only take you so far because, somebody who works hard and somebody who's willing to like stick with it and not be a quitter, those traits, which anybody can really hone, those kind of qualities, those will always be more valuable than talent because you can be talented as as the day is long, but if you don't go out in search of opportunities, you're never going to take advantage of that. So I've always been the type of person who kind of recognized my own limitations and said, okay, what can I actually do to accomplish things in my life based on like my limited knowledge, my limited capabilities? I'm not good at this. I'm not good at that. Like just having knowledge of your what you can't do, right, is a really good way to look at things. And then you can actually say, okay, now what can I do, right? So if you want to define who you are, first define what you are not. And that will make things a lot clearer about what direction you need to go in. So I guess that kind of like underlying principle has always guided me. And I think most people probably have a difficult time because they're always trying to think, well, how do I define myself? Who am I? Right. But if you reverse engineer that and figure out what you're
Mhm.
not good at, then you know what to avoid, right? You know what not to do. And then you can really start on a path towards success and self-improvement. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I admire that so much. And the truth is, part of my frustration, which is why I'm searching for political identity, always searching, always the bridesmaid, never the bride, thus far, is because the truth is, I haven't committed and put in the work, whatever it is. Like a buddy of mine used to say, who's a tremendous life coach, fitness guy. He would say, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You're changing doorknobs on the job site. You're doing this. You're a waiter. Treat it like it's an art. Do it to the best of your ability, and good things will follow. Are you familiar with your musical theater background? Have you seen the movie Fame? You heard of it?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So what's funny is I've never seen it, but apparently that main teacher is based on my great uncle Jerry. He was an
Yeah.
acting coach in New York. He taught Wesley Snipes, so that was him apparently. And he was an amazing guy. And his big piece of advice to me was talent doesn't mean shit. You have to work.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
it.
they don't teach you that. They don't teach you that in school. Like if I could go back, or if I were to teach a master class, I would explain to the students that like talent and skills in like being able to act or sing or dance or write or what have you. That is really only like 1/3 of what it means to be an actor or a performer or producer. And the old model of going to an audition, getting seen, getting cast, and becoming a star, that is not how it works anymore. These
Mm,
days, if you want to be in a show, you got to be the show. You have to write the show, you have to
mm,
produce the show, you have to direct the show, you have to act the show, and then you bring all these people around to you. And I'll tell you, I'm actually stealing these ideas. I can't take credit for them because I was just watching Jason Alexander, the guy who played George on Seinfeld, and this is kind of what he was saying, is that like the old
mm,
Hollywood system is just gone, especially because of streaming and podcasting, and everything that's being produced now out of Hollywood is being produced for the internet. It's to react to the news cycle or what's trending or what's a fad, and the internet really leads the way. So I mean, if you are a creative type, you just can't expect that there's going to be somebody who's going to make your career. There's no agent that's going to see you on the street corner and be like, you've got the great looks,
right.
nice gams. That's not going to happen. You have to make it all happen yourself. If you have a dream or if you want to be successful, nobody's going to do it for you. You have to build it brick by brick. That's what I've done, and that's how I've gotten to where I'm at.
It's incredible. It reminds me of a great sketch. Do you know the comedian? He might still be on SNL, but he was always kind of a bit player there. Kyle Mooney. Do you know that guy?
No.
He has a Beck Bennett. You might the guy who does Putin on SNL.
Oh yeah.
And Mike Pence. They were like a
Yeah.
tag team before they both got brought onto SNL. I think Beck has done better on SNL, but they had a really funny skit, just the two of them, where Kyle's just kind of singing to himself in the laundry, and then a guy turns the corner, he's like, "Hey, sound pretty good. I'd like to sign you." Like it doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't work like that anymore. But I mean, also because of the new internet economy, like, you can do it. Like nobody can stop you. Like the benefit of that is the hard part of the crappy part is that you have to work really, really hard and you have to do absolutely everything. But the benefit of that is that like nobody can fire you. No, like once you've
Right.
got your own show, once you give yourself a job, once you set yourself up in business, nobody can take it away from you. I mean, nobody I think is 100% cancel proof except for like Dave Chappelle, Joe
Mm,
Rogan, right? Like
mm,
those kinds of guys. But I'm almost as cancel proof as you can be from the perspective of if one of my revenue streams goes away or something happens, because I write for a couple of different magazines. I have gigs here and there. Like I have dozens of different revenue streams. If one goes away, one person says they don't like me anymore, they won't work with me anymore. That's okay. I got a dozen other ways I'm making money this way now. That was really hard to come by in the 1980s or the 1990s, to have those kinds of opportunities where you've got like a dozen different ways that you're making money. That did not exist then, and so there's never been more opportunity. Now it's hard,
mhm,
it's not easy.
mm,
There's a lot of competition, but if you're smart and you niche down, and I have a niche, right, that I operate in, then there are ways for you to like have financial security, and even for some people get very, very wealthy. But if you're not like trying to become the next Elon Musk or what have you, you can make a good living if you're savvy in how you kind of build and promote yourself and your brand these days.
And so it seems to me, first of all, there's obviously diversity within libertarianism, but some libertarians have beef with you. Is it that they think that you're niche down to the point where you're, what do you call it? Grifting? What is their beef with you? And who cares, by the way?
Man, the beautiful thing about like what I do is that like I don't require anyone else's consent to do what I do. I don't need anyone else's permission to do what I have to do. But I mean, you work in politics long enough. I run for office a couple times. You're going to make enemies, right? That's going to be a natural part of it. And like, I'm also willing to admit that I have an abrasive personality to an extent. I can be confrontational, right? But I mean, what's the saying that they say about girls? I think it applies to boys. Nice girl, well-behaved girls rarely make history.
Mm.
I mean, so I mean, you've got to throw up some chuff sometimes, right? You might have to get in people's faces, but also I think I really don't conform to dogma. And within any philosophical or ideological sect, there will be a group of people who are the religionists of that philosophy, and they will claim that this is the only true way. This is the light, the Son of God, the truth, the light, the truth, and nothing but the truth, and so help me God. So I've always been a free thinker, and I've always been the type of person who says I am a libertarian, but I reserve the right to think for myself, right? To change my mind, change my mind. If that's what it means to be truly free. If sometimes I think people, they strive for this ideological or intellectual consistency, but if you do that, you don't have any freedom. You're locked in. You're not making decisions on your own. You're only
it's the logic of the principles operating.
You're an NPC. You're not a free thinker. NPCs are programmed. You put the chip in, and it's like, what did Murray Rothbard say? This is what he would say. This is what I must do, right? And that is just not a dynamic way of thinking about things, and that rubs people raw. And especially because I'm the type of guy that comes up to if you look at libertarianism, like it does operate on a very cultish mentality to some extent, not always, but I'm the guy that says, well, maybe he didn't really rise after 3 days. Maybe it wasn't,
maybe it was a metaphor.
I question the holy of holies within libertarianism, and that is not acceptable. But I mean,
when you say that, are you referring to the non-aggression principle?
I am, bro.
Because well, I did a little bit. Okay, on your Wikipedia page, I couldn't believe when I got to the part where it says Austin has rejected the non-aggression principle. Tell me about that.
Well, there's long been criticism of the NAP. I mean, you know what an axiom is, right? Where it's like
self-evident.
An axiom, self-evident, right? Like when the founding fathers said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, right? It was kind of like, okay, well, there is a high standard for what might be considered self-evident, right? If something is to be self-evident, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, I think we can all agree, these are self-evident truths, right? But I think that the problem with the non-aggression principle is people think it's self-evident, but it's quite clearly not. Because if it were self-evident, I think most people would agree with it. Most people would be libertarians, but that's not the case. Most people aren't libertarians. Oh, and let's say you disagree with that, right? We can agree to disagree on that. Libertarians fail to address some of the core criticisms of the non-aggression principle, which I find to be problematic in the sense that what I have noticed, and this is my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I have noticed after 15 years of activism is that in terms of, if you look at the world with your base philosophy as being centered around aggression, the concept of aggression, that is such a shallow way of analyzing human interactions, because like, what is it when this, like, if is fraud a form of aggression? Well, not really, because if I skeeve a little bit off the top, like through a financial transaction, like I'm not committing a violent act, but it is fraud. It should be illegal, right? Force
Hmm.
and fraud, libertarians will frequently say, but the fraud part of interactions can sometimes get a little bit muddy. And so what I've noticed is that when you're talking about things like war or national defense or national security or even personal defense and personal security, there will be such a wide range of opinions about violent acts amongst libertarians that if this non-aggression principle was axiomatic, then we would have all agreed about Kyle Rittenhouse and his behavior in Kenosha, Wisconsin, when he gunned down 3 Black Lives Matter activists in what I would call an act of self-defense. But there were libertarians who thought it wasn't self-defense. They thought that he was a little white nationalist, serial
Yeah,
killer.
I can't imagine a libertarian having that view. I certainly, and I'm not a libertarian yet, but I seem to me like a straight up and down case of self-defense. Maybe he committed some crime by bringing the gun there. Maybe he didn't. It's kind of irrelevant to
If you go
the
back
interact.
and yeah, if you go back and check the historical record, Brian, you will find that there are some libertarians who thought that the way that he acted was deliberately provocative, carrying a rifle to a protest,
Mm,
most fiery but mostly peaceful. All right, and whether it's that's one thing when it's an individual defense. We can't agree on an individual defensive thing. People want to apply the non-aggression principle to NATO. People want to apply the non-aggression principle to something as complicated as Israel versus Palestine. I mean, that is just, I mean, you're going to
mm,
make a lot of mistakes. Now,
right.
I will say, from a playground perspective, it's good to teach your kids, don't hit people, don't take their stuff, don't interact, don't initiate violence or force against other people. You can do it in defense. But what I have realized, Brian, ultimately is that, like, when I meet a lot of libertarians, the more firmly they believe in the non-aggression principle, the less I hear a real coherent, not only national defense protocol from them or policy, but I hear
Mm,
even a less coherent self-defense policy. Essentially, what I've realized is that if you let the Napsies, I call them the Napsies, take over, like it would be unilateral disarmament, no nukes, no bombs that might actually cause secondary damage or things like that. Like, eventually it's down to, like, oh, I guess we'll have to give up our guns too, because a gun might actually accidentally hit a third
right.
party bystander while I'm defending myself. So I think it's incoherent, and it becomes like a centerpiece of a religion rather than a logical philosophical system. That's a long drawn out explanation for why I kind of have niggling doubts.
So, what then is the key principle in your mind of libertarianism? What does it mean to be a libertarian then?
So self-ownership, um, private property, and from private property and self-ownership flows all else: life, liberty, and property, and in that order. Because without life, there is no liberty. Without liberty, you can't own property. And so, to me,
But it's
there's
fulfilling. It's a self-fulfilling circle as well, though, because and this is what I started to pick up in law school as I took property class and just started to learn the basic where the furniture is laid out in our society. I said, "Oh wow, property is so important. So much of our society, our law is based around property ownership, and so it must be really important."
Oh yeah, for sure. And so when I consider the concept of property or ownership, I consider myself as having property and ownership in myself, in my body, and in my life. And so from from that, I also consider myself to be pro-life. Someone who thinks that the individual child in the womb is also, being a human being, should have the same protections as the rest of us. And like me, going, not to press a point too much, but many of my disagreements with libertarians, that if they have beef with me, might be because I take a very strong stance when it comes to the protection of the rights of children, when I consider that they are not fully formed adults, that essentially their rights are sort of held in escrow by either the
Mhm.
parents, or if the parents are not in the situation, then either their guardian or then the state.
Right.
And in that, and so in that kind of a situation, right, the question is, how do we protect the rights of children?
Mm.
And in that situation, I think that's kind of what takes me out of the realm of potentially being an anarchist and saying, here's what I am. I'm a constitutionalist. I'm a minarchist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just close enough to the anarchists that they can, slap me in the face and, take shots at me. But I'm far away from being a neocon, far away from being a communist, far away from being a fascist and all of that. So on that spectrum or that line, I consider myself right next door to an anarchist, pretty damn close to an anarchist, but not
Right.
quite.
No, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. The unborn child's rights, it's not that they don't exist because they haven't come to be yet. It's that they're held in escrow. That's an interesting way to look at it.
Mhm.
So your support for Trump, is it because he is the best option in a sea of potentially bad options? Maybe you don't even think he's a bad option, but is as simple as, hey, really want to know, I want to know why you support Trump rather than one of the currently running libertarian candidates.
Well, I've been a young and a fiery radical, and now that I've gotten to be, middle age and a family, I start to see things, with perhaps a little bit more perspective, and a little bit more, just a little bit more. I don't know. I'm not quite sure what the word is I'm looking for, but just more depth when I make these kinds of considerations.
Mm.
And the thing about Trump, my brother and I, he's been kind of red pilled in the last few years. He's a really interesting guy. You'd love to talk to him.
What's he do?
So he is a voice teacher, right? And he got red pilled. He's like a center left liberal who is now voting Republican and voting Donald Trump himself as well because of what the woke mind virus has done to the arts and
Mm.
what he lived in Boston during the height of the COVID pandemic. And he saw the fascism up close and in person. And so, he's like, I can't go along with this. I mean, he's a gay man. And now the LGBT community is saying to him, you have to be attracted to women now because this is the thing. Like his whole life, he fought to like come out of the closet and to have his own views and to be like, I'm a gay man and I want to live this kind of lifestyle. And that only to have the LGBT community turn on him and say, well, you're a bigot because you don't want to date this woman who says that they're a man, right? So his story is also very fascinating. But what was the original question on that one?
So why Trump? Why Trump?
Why Trump? Well, why Trump? So, my brother told me this. Yes, that's how I got there. He said, you don't even agree with your spouse, your significant other, on 100% of things. He's like, you don't agree with them on 90% of things a lot of times. He's like, is it perhaps a bit unrealistic to expect that you're going to agree with your presidential candidate, like to a certain extent, like on everything? I think, and even if that's hyperbole, maybe even like, 90% of things or 80% of things, that might be asking too much. That being said, whenever I bring up my next part of my argument for why I'm voting for Trump, I get a lot of this, nah, I'm not listening. But I have a whole PDF that is a list of Donald Trump's accomplishments. And contained within that PDF is a list of policies that he actually put the pen to and signed that advanced libertarian ideas that people like myself have been advocating for a couple of decades. Some people have advocated for more than that. The First Step Act, right to try. There are a lot of things that we as libertarians wanted to see happen. And, I'm the type of person who has always been very impatient. I want to see change now. I want to see liberty now. But if I can't have, all that I want, I'm going to take that 5%, 10%. I want to move the ball down the line. And the funny thing is that Donald Trump, he wasn't hated so much for the authoritarian things that he did. He was hated for the libertarian things that he did,
right?
Which I found fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And so the only times he got praised by the mainstream establishment was when he bombed, that general, that Iranian general. That was when they were all like, wow, he's so presidential. That's when you had
Right.
CBS and NBC, and they're all like,
this guy's not so bad.
Yeah, they're like, oh, he's great, and you're like, okay, well, now they like him, right? Which is fascinating. But when he did libertarian things, they either, they continued to attack him for other things. So I think, Trump is net positive, and
right.
certainly it's not always the best strategy to do enemy my enemy is my friend. But when you're in a war,
Mm.
And people that you have been fighting for, decades say to you, listen, these big guys that we're fighting, you're fighting a war on three fronts. Like at the end of World War II, the Nazis actually thought they were going to team up with the Americans. They were desperate. They
Mm.
wanted to. They're Heinrich Himmler was like, what do I salute Eisenhower or do I give him the Sieg Heil? Right. And it was like they thought that, because you know why? Because they thought the Americans were going to be their friends against our common enemy, which is in Russia. And guess what? The Americans took a lot of Nazis, brought them back to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And the conspiracy theorists always love to talk about Operation Paperclip.
Paperclip, yeah.
Werner von Braun and the Nazi scientists who built NASA. It's like, okay, yeah, we know, we heard that the first time. But that when your back is to the wall, when you're desperate, and your back is to the wall, you're going to do that. You're going to make that deal. You can tell me all day. You can tell me all day long about all your principles. But when your throat is like, when the knife is to your throat and your back is to the wall, you might do a dirty deal to say, well, I don't want to die. I don't want to have my throat cut. And I can fight this larger enemy if we team up today. And, that can get you in trouble. Sure. Can it come back and bite you in the ass, foreign policy wise? Absolutely. Can it bite you? Yeah. Because as soon as you've won that battle, then all of a sudden you and your old enemies will be fighting again. But I think the problem is a lot of people don't look at things. If you look at things only from the philosophical perspective and never the kind of tactical, practical perspective, if you don't read Art of War and understand Sun Tzu and understand, the basics of strategy, the art of war, then I think you're going to make mistakes if your job is to advance an idea. If you're really trying to if you're really trying to advance an idea, be a philosopher king, and you've got to take the practical steps that are necessary to move you towards a goal. Donald Trump fights the woke left. That is the battle that we are in right now. These students who are barricading themselves on public campus, making life hell and dangerous for Jewish students on college campuses. Right? These are our enemy. These are our ideology. These are the people who tear down statues. These are people who lie to our face about fiery but mostly peaceful protests. These are the people who are trying to cancel us on social media, cancel us from our payment processors, make our lives a living hell. The war is with them. They have declared war against us. Donald Trump does stand between us and them, and they hate him. And I've got my beef with Donald Trump on certain issues. I don't agree with him on economics or trade or things like that. But I recognize that right now we've got a bigger enemy to fight. There's a bigger dragon to slay, and there are more important issues to fight over a 5% to 10% tariff that I, personally disagree with. Just that's what I would say.
Yeah. And so this idea that the culture war is real, it's not, a made up phenomenon. And the question is, whose culture should be dominant in this country? And this is what you learn in the critical race theory classes I was mentioning to you before we started recording in law school, this idea that the mainstream culture in America is white. It's a straight white man's culture and it needs to be transformed. And so you either think that in contemporary society that's true, or you think that no, we have an egalitarian society, and if you don't think that we have an egalitarian society, then you're going to want to fight for that, sure. But that's what these people, the woke, is all about, right? Is we want to be represented, we want to be seen, we want to be cared for, respected, and able to thrive in this society, and we can't because this is a straight white man society. It's crazy because there's been so much progress, obviously, since the Civil Rights Act, but there's also been too much progress. Potentially, have we become so inclusive, like Vivek would say, have we become so inclusive that we've become exclusive, or have we lost sight of what actually ties us throughout these divisions? And so are we just growing into different silos culturally?
Yeah, to some extent. And I mean, the more you know about history and the more you read history that not just the history that you agree with, but the more you read history you disagree with too, and hear about all the warts and all of the United States and accept the truth, even when the truth you don't like to hear it, right? Like for example, Stephanie and I went to Thomas Jefferson's Monticello a few weeks ago, and she's always been a big lover of Thomas Jefferson, and myself as well. Thomas Jefferson has always been one of my greatest inspirations my whole life, ever since I was a child. But it's hard to hear what he did with his slaves. It's hard to listen to. And I can imagine that there are some people, if me, who has a very tolerant, view about things in general, if I, am, struggling with that, right, and what I'm hearing about how Jefferson treated his slaves, I can imagine that for most people, they're probably like in one ear, out the other, blah, 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 I'm not listening, right? And so they resist that, right? So, which is to say that people who do that, they probably, there's these two reactionary movements, a leftist reactionary and a rightist reactionary movement. And they're both sort of like at war with one another to an extent, because both of them are highly intolerant, especially of each other, but also, most people are intolerant of views that they don't agree with, right? We live in a society of perpetual offense. So the problem is that most people read the history that they agree with. They only listen to the history that they agree with, and they can't contend with the ideas that don't confirm their biases, because most humans are bias confirming creatures. That's what we are. That's how we've evolved and survived, was to confirm our biases, trust our instincts. And I'm not saying don't trust your instincts, but I mean, you have to have like meters and parameters that you operate within that are based on pure, cold, hard logic and reason, and not just your gut. Right. And my gut, when I hear Thomas Jefferson and how he treated his slaves, my gut's like, ugh, right. I want to resist that, but I want to hear what happened. I want to know the truth. I want to know what he did with Sally Hemings, and I want to know what he did with his slaves there. I want to know what George Washington, the awful things that he did with his slaves, so I can contend with that. And the right has a problem contending with like the racial legacy, the racial history of the United States. The left does as well, but the left, has a problem with contending with the ideas of basic supply and demand, the laws of supply and demand, and economics, right? So they're all hearing what they want to hear in order to confirm their biases for whichever religion that they're trying to advance, whether it be the religion of communism or militant imperialist right-wing Catholicism, right? So no matter which cult you're a part of here in this country, you're going to get the cult's view of American history. And I look at the United States. There has been a white landed male aristocracy here in the United States. They were mostly killed off during the Civil War. The Civil War basically ended the white aristocracy in this country. The Southern plantation owners during the Civil War were wiped out largely to a man, and the country has been a majority white male country in terms of population, white males and females population, but if you're not a white male, you're essentially like a mongrel to a large extent, based on the history of immigration in the United States. The views of the founding fathers for immigration are radically different from modern conservatives. And, whether you like it or not, the founding fathers wanted a lot of immigration to this country for the sole purpose. It's like America wasn't America yet. Like, it was 13 colonies, and they knew that they wanted to expand west. Contained within the Declaration of Independence is Thomas Jefferson's beef with King George, that he wasn't letting them settle west of the Appalachians. And so the dream of manifest destiny meant that if America was to be a great nation, as Jefferson called it to be one day, an empire of liberty, an empire were his words, an empire of liberty, that would require a massive population. And that was not going to happen just simply through direct births of citizens. But populism has had its moments in American history. Progressivism has had its populism can be progressive, it can be conservative, it can, progressivism is really just anti-elitism. So it can take almost any ideological stripe. But when you look at the United States, if you're not a white male or female, you're probably a mongrel. You might have been an Irish Catholic at one point, which used to be kind of like the way that they were treated as second-class citizens, comparable to blacks in the civil rights era and Jim Crow. The first immigration laws in the United States were written to protect us against the Chinese, right? The Chinese Exclusion Act. If you want to have a culture that's a white culture, America has always been whites and mongrels. It has been people from all over the world who came to the United States to help us to build this up. And then in the late 1860s, we had a war over whether or not people could own other people.
Right.
And the aristocracy, because aristocrats love the idea of taking ownership in other people, and that there's still an aristocratic mindset. There's still aristocratic to an extent white people in this country. They just happen to be like left liberal types, like your Hillary Clintons, and all of that. And you don't even have to be white anymore to sort of like believe that you own other people to an extent. I mean, did you see how Ellen DeGeneres treated her staff?
Right.
I mean, there are people in this country who still think that they own other people to an extent, right? They can treat them like subhuman. So there is still that desire in America. It's just that in America, anybody can own another person, according to some, right?
Well, that's the thing, like this big idea of property that we already touched upon. If the founding idea of this country is property, the question then becomes, okay, can that idea be cured of the awful stain of slavery? And so when we talk about self-ownership and ownership of private property, there are people who just reject the whole system outright because it has the potential or has the stain of slavery. So that's part of it, I think. But there's the economic aspect of the culture war, which we're kind of touching on, and then there's the trans thing, which is just I'm with you. I think feminism has gone too far, and there isn't enough testosterone in this society. So it's just apparent, isn't it?
Oh boy, that's a lot. Yeah. So there's the trans thing, and then there's feminism and lack of testosterone. So the lack of testosterone, I mean, it's a cultural thing, it's a biological thing, right? It's civilization. These are civilizational questions you were asking here. I mean, that deal with our most innate, personhood, our self and our biological sex. And so, of course, the left wants to erode the very foundations of our civilization in order to have a revolution, to overthrow the established order, and to institute a new world order based around their uniform communistic principles. So in some sense, to get the lay of the land here, I think what we're really talking about is the root struggle here is really individualism versus collectivism, to a large extent, and then from that everything sort of breaks off. In terms of feminism and its close ties to Marxism, that's well documented. If you go to Wikipedia right now, you'll find like 13, 14 different schools of thought within feminism. And I like to be as accurate as possible when I'm criticizing it. I will be speaking in blanket terms to an extent here now. I am generalizing, so I just want everybody to know that like everything I'm about to say right now is working on generalizations and may not be the case in every case. I try and refrain from speaking in absolutes here in this, going forward. When discussing this question of feminism and the lack of masculinity in our society, I majored in musical theater, for God's sakes. And if I see a lack of masculinity in our country, maybe
you're the canary in the coal mine.
I might be to a certain extent, because, I like the finer things in life and the classics and the arts and philosophy. And, I was raised rough on a farm, and, I've done animal husbandry, and I've hunted and I've killed, and I understand the circle of life, but there is, again, we have eroded the base of masculinity in this society, because masculinity, strong men are the greatest threat to tyranny,
because they're the base of the family unit, and the family unit is required for individualism to thrive.
Correct. If you want to eliminate any threats to your rule as the king, who do you kill first? I mean, Brian, you've probably, you're Jewish. You've read at least the Old Testament, right? So you know the story of Moses, right? Why did Moses' mother put him in the basket?
Because he was going to be killed.
He was going to be killed. Well, now, why did they do this? They killed the young men of Israel, and it's in order to ensure that there would be no challenges to their rule. And so nowadays, you can't, it's, this isn't ancient Israel. You can't just round up the firstborn of all the white babies and kill the firstborn of all the white babies in order to ensure that there aren't too many white people. But what do they do? What are they doing now? Like there was this article in Politico this week. People were talking about it. It was called the Natalism Conference, and it was a bunch, basically mostly white people who got together for this very small conference to talk about how we should have more babies and how we should encourage more babies. And the left wrote this hit piece on it and calling it a far right conference, as if wanting to have a lot of babies is this far right idea. So they can't kill us. The left wants to kill us. They would absolutely kill us if they had the chance, and they do sometimes. But the left wants to erode masculinity in this country, and it's not just white masculinity. I mean, masculine black men, they've already got the black men to a large extent. The fathers are out of the homes. Leftist, Marxist, feminists went after black men first and took them out of the homes and destroyed their ability to fight back. And now they're trying to go after the Latinx thing with the Latinos. Right, that was an attempt by feminism to try and degenderize the Spanish language, and they were having none of it because Latinos, Latin males are masculine.
They got a little T. They still got a little T in them.
They're dangerous, and so leftists, feminists, and Marxists, in trying to destroy their enemies, they see whiteness and masculinity. This is a challenge to their rule. They can't take us and throw us in the river. They can't feed us to the crocodiles in the Nile, but they can certainly do the equivalent in universities. They get you in college. The left owns all of the important institutions in this country. And if you're a white male, it's like walking into a meat grinder. And so you walk into these institutions with their diversity, equity, and inclusion, environmental, social, and governance standards. There's no $150,000 paid a year job for male leadership, but there sure as hell are 6-figure jobs for the ladies to get the ladies in the jobs and all this thing. So they're using the institutions of society, and that includes the churches, by the way, the religious institutions. You see, feminism has taken over most of the churches, from what I've been able to tell. And I'm not a church goer. I used to be. But from all of my friends and what I hear and what I'm reading in the news, it sounds as if the churches have also been ideologically captured by feminism, to a lesser extent, right? It's not necessarily the type of Marxist feminism that you'd find on Columbia campus, but you see online, Brian, the traditional conservative battle between the red pill community and the men going their own way. The sort of the right wing kind of red pill men are at war with mostly women that are traditionally conservative, because come to find out, a lot of conservative women are also actually feminists too. And with that comes a lot of the poisoning of the Marxist programming, which is an attack on at its root. The most dangerous group to any tyrant will always be strong, capable, individualistic men. That's why they want to kill us. They've killed us throughout history. And that is why they are trying to destroy us now through the institutions in our society.
So obviously you feel like this civilizational battle is as real as it gets, and Trump is a warrior, and you're going to go with the warrior right now. That's the point. People will say, though, that, well, Austin, you're reading a little too much into this nefarious agenda. Sure, I agree with you that our testosterone levels are down. Something ain't right. But is it really the case that there's a nefarious agenda at work? And you believe that?
Well, I believe it because I've seen it up close and in person. I'm a testament to it. I'll tell you one little story. And when you're an activist, as long as I've been, and I was an activist in New York City, and I have friends that are anarchists, and I've seen some scary shit up close, Brian. And I'll tell you, one of the creepiest things I ever saw was this halfway house that was this cabin, not out in the woods, but just kind of like out in the middle of nowhere. And it was a camp for wayward kids and refugee, like runaway kids and kids who were from broken homes. And it was this nonprofit institution. And when you look at it on the front of the face of it, it sounds very It probably gets tax dollars. It sounds very banal, boring, oh, this is just a home for wayward kids, et cetera, et cetera. I went there for a bachelor party one weekend, not knowing what I was walking into. And the whole house is a communist training camp for children. It's essentially this halfway home that takes in kids that either their parents don't accept them or don't want them or whatever you, takes these kids and teaches them how to hate cops. I mean, there were books everywhere with pictures of like cops as pigs. There were pictures on the wall of communist revolutionaries, and like all the other guys, the bachelors who were there that weekend to like have a good time and celebrate the party. They were all just like drinking beers and like, grilling steaks and shit. I'm like staring, I'm like reading books, like staring at the walls, looking at this literature, acting like a freak because I'm like, you guys see this? Like, what is this place? Like, this is a conspiracy here against our values. I was so shocked by it. I never forgot it. I remember very intimate details, but I thought to myself, is there a nefarious agenda going on? I'm not stupid enough to believe that like an overall cabal of insider Illuminatis are truly even capable of pulling off like organized conspiracies and then somehow keeping them from the public. One, because I know people are terrible at secrets. Like people are awful at keeping secrets. Like we know most of the evil government conspiracies because people can't keep their mouth shut. MK Ultra, COINTELPRO, all the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and things like that. We know about those conspiracies, right? So not to say that maybe there aren't a few still behind the scenes. That could still happen. But for the most part, the conspiracy against our rights is happening in our universities. It's out in the open. The institutions of the United States, whether it's academia or whether it's the corporations, they are all conspiring together. It's more of a disparate, broken up, groups, the Sierra Club, the World Economic Forum, and sometimes they work together and sometimes they don't. But for the most part, I would say, 85% or more of the institutions in the United States are wholly captured by leftists, woke, what's the word I'm looking for here? Postmodernist theory that is ideologically captured our country. So, I mean, is there are there evil insiders conspiring against our rights? Sure. Do they succeed sometimes? Yeah, I think so. Not always, but most of the conspiracy against our rights is out in the open, like the banking system, the interest rates,
right?
The housing market, and the bailouts. The evil. The problem with the real evil that we face, Brian,
right in front of our face.
It's boring. It's not fun. Nobody wants to talk about interest rates for 6 hours. Nobody wants to sit down and talk about how gold used to be backed by, our money used to be backed by gold. And nobody wants to talk about that stuff. Right. That's not sexy. That's not fun. The sexy stuff is like the CIA put a chip in my brain, bro, and they're flying jets above us. That's fun.
No, I want to ask you about aliens next.
All right, aliens is great. All right, let's keep going in overtime. So I think that the banality of evil is really what it is. I've heard that phrase recently. I think I was watching a documentary about it was about some of the Nazis in the concentration camps and how they carried on their evil on a daily basis. So in such a way that it just became blasé to them. It's kind of like, or the people who were not even in the camps, that the Germans nearby that, kind of knew what was going on. They wanted to get rid of the Jews next door because the Jews next door had a really nice house and they were hoping the Nazis were going to take them and they could move into the house next door. Right. But I mean, think about that. That's evil, right? But that's boring. The fun evil, everybody wants to talk about the fun evil, which is, oh, look at the camps, look at all this kind of stuff. But what about the neighbors who turned them over to the Nazis, right? How about the banality of evil? That's much more common, more common.
Yeah, I mean, I was only half joking when I said I wanted to ask you about aliens, but to summarize and land this plane and let you go, because you've been really generous with your time and I really appreciate it. Libertarianism to me has about 3 dimensions. You got civil liberties, you got economics, and you've got foreign policy, if that sounds close enough. And with the civil liberty stuff, clearly you're a libertarian, but You're not a libertarian who says there's no line. No, there is a line. There's a line at which you erode civilization if you become too free or too whatever. If you let yourself go to a certain point, you get to a bad place, and you're not down for that. So I think is that fair to say about your civil liberty stance?
I mean, well, here's the thing. If you're a minarchist, that means you believe in some government, right? So the question is, how far does it go? And, I don't think government should weigh in on cultural matters, but I think that if we have a government that protects us at our most basic of needs in order to have a healthy civilization, I think that there is something healthy, from having a government that has, does enforcement, police, right, courts, in order to ensure that we can have contract enforcement. And then I like to say nuclear weapons. So I say cops, courts, and nukes. But when I'm talking about nuclear weapons, I'm really talking about a military. I'm talking about a national defense. I'm talking about an actual legitimate theory of defense that would involve, the U.S. Marines, the U.S. Navy, the Air Force, maybe the Space Force, and probably really we don't need the Army, quote unquote, unless we're actually at war or at a war footing, in which case then you can call up the Army. But from my understanding of the Constitution, you're not really supposed to have a quote standing army, right? The founding fathers really weren't fans of this idea. We have one now. I think the United States is far too militarist. We've gone way too far away from what I would say would be an ideal form of government. And I know my anarchist friends would say, it's inevitable. I'm like, yes. And just like death and taxes, right? Taxes are inevitable. And so what I would like to see is just a society that has proper limits for its government, but everything else is anarchy, right? Society, the war of ideas, government shouldn't put its thumb on the scale and say, well, we want to have a DEI standard here for this race, and then we like Asians today. Oh no, too many Asians in college. Let's put the thumb on the scale the other way now. I just want to see them keep the peace, right? Keep contracts, and then protect us from an invasion or the threat of a civilizational destruction from a massive war. I believe in George Washington when he said, he was really quoting an ancient Roman, but he said the most effective means of assuring peace is to prepare for war, which in Latin means is sivi pacem para bellum. So if you want peace, prepare for war. So I think you should think peace and fight for peace and want to be on the side of peace. But this is where libertarians have a lot of beef with me. If you want peace, be ready to kill. I'll finish this last quote. Sorry. General James Mattis, say what you will about him, had some epic quotes. He says, be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everyone you meet.
I wish we could end on that very quote, but I want to ask you one last question in the final minute. Can you give me some wisdom on the Ukraine and Israel and maybe even Taiwan aid? Do you support giving aid to those countries? I know it's a big question. I don't want to keep you for more than a minute.
It's really, I do not, here's the thing. I do not apply a blanket philosophy to this. I'm not an NPC. I'm going to look at each of these things from an individual perspective, and we have to consider what is really in the best interests of the people of the United States. Liberty should be number one, but if we have to have government involved in some way, I don't think that we should be sending foreign aid to Ukraine. I don't think we should be sending foreign aid to Israel, although I wish them both well, and I am ideologically on their side. If someone were to ask me, would I donate to a cause freely of my own volition? Would I do it?
Right.
Sure. But I still think that people in this country who don't support those countries should not be taxed to support a cause that I believe in, because it's not in our national defense interests, in my opinion. Neocons would disagree. They think, oh, we don't want Russia. It's like, they're still kind of in the old 1980s Soviet thing, right? And then with Israel, I think, there are a lot of people who have a special interest because of whatever their cultural ethnic background is. They're going to be more partial towards one side or another. I'm personally partial to Israel because ideologically, I find them to be more aligned with American principles of individualism. Although Israel is, it's a very socialist country in some ways compared to the United States.
Yeah.
So I've got things that I disagree with Israel on, And because of that, I would say, while I morally stand with Israel, I don't think you can disagree with me and I think be reasonable on this, on the Israel-Gaza conflict. And I don't think you ought to be taxed to support ideas that you disagree with. Now, on Taiwan, there might be, I think, a national defense interest there,
with the
potentially.
chips.
You're damn right, because there's not a single goddamn person in this country, Brian, who, if you suddenly said to them, no more iPhones, no more computers, no more of that stuff, that they're gonna go, okay, sure.
No.
There'll be 10 anarchists who will be like, mad at you all night. But the moment you take away their phones or whatever, they're addicted to Tinder or Grindr or OnlyFans, they're
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, exactly. We need to ensure that we can produce these things here. We need free trade. We probably need to build better relationships with India. We need to lower our minimum wage in the United States. Stop jacking up the cost to create stuff here in the United States. I mean, there's so many things that, so many problems that cascade on one another, because you have a government created problem, and then the solution creates another problem, and then the solution makes things worse. So, a lot of times you have to kind of unroll the statism bit by bit by bit by bit. But I do think Taiwan, I mean, if you know anything about the history of Taiwan and America's involvement there and what happened after World War II, like the relationship of the United States with China during World War II and what happened subsequently in China from the 1940s to the 1960s is kind of probably one of the least understood historic moments of history that are impacting us now, that Americans they've not done their homework on. And so they don't understand what the Isle of Formosa is and why Taiwan exists and what their flag was, how their flag got to be their flag and who was fighting who. I mean, it's a lot for people to even know American history, let alone Russian history and the communist revolution. It's a lot to ask of people for them to take time out of their days and figure out how Mao Zedong beat Chiang Kai-shek, for the nationalists versus the communists, and how the United States went from being great allies to the Chinese because the Japanese imperialists were murdering them, some Chinese, like it was going out of business. And then all of a sudden, after World War II, the flight of the nationalists to Taiwan, and a capitalist country that creates a shit ton of products that the American citizens use. How do you even begin to explain something like that to someone, if they have no concept of their own history? How can you explain to them the history of Taiwan and China? I mean, I have a very nuanced opinion on that kind of a thing.
Well, thank you for sticking around and giving me that. It was very instructive on the foreign policy. It is hard to be an informed citizen, I find, domestically, let alone with foreign policy. So that's why we turn to thought leaders like yourself, man. You're an amazing guy, and you're doing fantastic work, and clearly you deserve it. You're like I said, you're a force, man. So I really appreciate connecting with you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I mean, these are very kind words, Brian. I sometimes I kind of think of myself as mid, but it's nice to hear.
Don't let it go to your head, but no, you're not mid at all.
Well, I wish that you were in a more amenable time zone, because my live show, I'd love to have you as a guest on my show sometime, but I don't know if you would get up that early. And
I certainly would, but I would want to make sure that I was ready to perform. So you let me know, and I'll be there.
It would be hard, but if you're truly interested, I'll let you know. I have some people on the West Coast who will make appearances on my show sometimes. I have one regular guest who's in Seattle. So she gets way up early. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll definitely reach out to you for that, because these conversations should continue.
Right. Yeah. Well, I hope so. And I'm so glad to have connected with you. Can't thank you enough for taking the time. I would love to take you up on that. So Austin Peterson of the Wake Up America Show. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you. I feel like we only scratched the surface, but
I know.
Glad to meet you. Yeah. Have a good one.
Yep. You as well. Take care.